The message arrived as a thin whisper across the deep black of space. It sounded like wind through dry leaves, soft and afraid. A small receiver on a lonely station caught it and held it there, blinking a quiet light that no one had noticed in hours. Inside the station, Captain Daniel Harris rubbed his eyes and leaned forward. He was on the night shift again, if such a thing could exist in endless dark, and he was tired of empty static. When he played the message, a voice filled the room. It was a Zyranth voice, gentle and shaking. It spoke in plain trade speech. It asked for help. Daniel did not move at first. He listened to the whole message from start to end. The voice spoke of burning cities and broken sky shields. It spoke of people hiding in caves and tunnels. It spoke of the Karth Dominion, a hard and cruel empire that used iron laws and fear to hold other worlds by the throat. The voice asked for mercy. It said they had asked the Galactic Council. It said they got silence back. Then the voice ended with a soft sound like someone trying not to cry. The recording stopped. Daniel looked at the small screen. He thought of his home on Earth. He thought of strong storms that broke trees in half. He thought of hot deserts and cold seas and the way humans had learned to live with both. Earth was a hard world. People from other planets called it a death world. They said humans were dangerous because they had learned to stand up in a place that tried to knock them down every day. Daniel did not argue with that. He had grown up under a sky that could turn from a gentle blue to a wall of black in an hour. He knew what it felt like to be small and still choose to fight. He sent the recording to Commander Rachel Stone. She was his superior officer on the station and the one who would decide what happened next. While he waited for her reply, he played the message again. He had the feeling that silence would not sit right with him anymore. The Zyranth did not sound like warriors. They sounded like teachers and artists and farmers who had never planned to hold a weapon in their hands. He could not push that thought away. Rachel answered within minutes and came down to the monitoring room. She moved with quiet energy, eyes taking in every screen, every sound, the way a pilot checks the sky. She nodded at Daniel, then at the console. He played the message for her. She did not speak while it played. She folded her arms and listened until it finished, until the soft sound at the end faded into the hum of the station. "Who else has this?" she asked. "No one yet," Daniel said. "It came to us because our receiver sweeps the edge bands. It may hit others soon, but not before we decide what to do." Rachel stood for a long moment. She looked like someone measuring a jump across a wide river. She knew the weight that would fall on her if she moved first. The galaxy called humans monsters. It was not because humans loved to hurt. It was because humans did not quit. Humans did not give ground when they believed a line should hold. Other species sometimes mistook that for cruelty. Rachel knew better. She had seen what Earth did to the weak and the careless. It turned them into meals for the strong. Humans had survived by becoming something that would not break. "Get Marcus, Amanda, and Jason on the line," Rachel said. "We will meet in the briefing room in 10 minutes. Daniel nodded and sent the summons. The small crew of the station moved with practice. They had trained for trouble that might never come, but they trained anyway. The briefing room was simple. A table, a wall screen, a pot of old coffee that someone still kept fresh out of habit. Rachel stood at the head of the table and waited for them all to sit. Marcus Green, broad-shouldered and quiet. Amanda Lewis, tired eyes but a steady face. Jason Carter, alert and restless like a hawk on a wire. Rachel played the message again. None of them spoke while it played. None of them looked away from the screen, though there was nothing to see except a soft waveform and a string of data. When it ended, Jason let out a slow breath. Amanda looked down at her hands. Marcus rubbed a thumb over a scar on his knuckle. Rachel let the silence hang for a few seconds more. "The Zyranth are asking for help," she said. "The council has not moved. The Karth Dominion is pressing hard on their worlds. I will not force anyone to act. But I will say this. If we answer, we will wear our name. The galaxy calls us monsters. Fine. Then we will be the monsters the innocent need." Marcus spoke first. "I do not like being called a monster," he said. "But I understand what they mean. Out there they think we bring storms with us. I cannot change their minds. I can change what happens to those people. I am in." Amanda lifted her gaze. "I have seen too many men break," she said. "I do not want to watch whole cities break while we stand still. If we go, I go." Jason leaned forward, his voice soft. "I do not care what the council thinks," he said. "They can polish their badges while worlds burn." "I will fly," Rachel nodded once. The decision settled over the room, heavy but steady, like a coat taken on for a long winter. "Then here is what we do," she said. "We are small. We cannot win a full war alone, but we can change the shape of this fight. We can take their knives away. We can give the Xyranth time to breathe." She opened a plan on the screen. It was lean and direct. They would alert a small cluster of Earth ships within range. They would not wait for permission from faraway offices that counted losses on neat charts. They would pull together crews who understood that saving lives sometimes meant stepping into fire. They would bring medical supplies, modular shields, and a few tools the Council had frowned at in past meetings. Rachel did not care about old frowns. She cared about lives. They moved fast. Jason ran system checks on the small fleet docked to the station. He touched controls the way a pianist touches keys, sure and light. He spoke to the ships like old friends. Marcus led drills with the boarding teams. He taught them to move like water through tight corridors to protect each other, to end a threat cleanly when there was no other choice. Amanda checked the med bays and started building extra kits from spare parts. She had a gift for making 10 things out of 5. Daniel handled comms and gathered every piece of open data about the Karth fleets near Xyranth space. They learned ship shapes and weapon signatures the way sailors learn the mood of a sea. While they worked, rumors drifted in from the heavy lanes. The Council was still silent. Some said Council members were trapped by old agreements. Some said they were afraid to poke the Karth. Some said they were waiting for someone else to move first. That last one made Rachel shake her head. Waiting for someone else to move first had never saved anyone from a fire. Before dawn, if dawn could be said to come on a station in dark, Rachel stood on the small hangar floor and looked at her crew. They wore plain suits with earth patches. There were no bright banners. There were no long speeches. She said only this: "We are going to people who asked for mercy. We will not promise safety we cannot give. We will promise effort that will not stop. Hold to that promise." The ships undocked in a neat line and slid into the black. Jason led the approach in his fighter, fast and sharp. The larger ship followed, heavy with supplies and a mind for battle. Rachel stood on the bridge with Daniel at comms, Amanda in med, Marcus with the boarding teams. The jump to faster travel was smooth. The fleet vanished from one patch of stars and fell toward another. During the jump, Rachel reviewed the pieces of the plan that still felt thin. The Karth had a habit of using fear to pin people in place. They would attack a shield and then broadcast pictures of the damage to freeze neighbors with shock. Rachel wanted to break that habit. She planned to hit their relay ships first. Without relays, the Karth would be blind. Without eyes, they would be slower and clumsier. The Xyranth would breathe again. They dropped out of faster travel on the edge of Xyranth space. At once, the screens lit with noise. There were distress calls, weapon flashes, debris fields. Jason's voice came over the line, calm and clear. "I see relay targets," he said. "Marking 3. 2 with light escorts. 1 with teeth." Rachel gave the order to move. Jason peeled off toward the relay with teeth. He always took the hard line first. The larger ship slid between a Xyranth moon and a Karth cruiser. Marcus had his teams ready to board if the chance came. Amanda stood at the med station with her hands folded very still, as if stillness could make speed when needed. Daniel managed the flood of signals and cut a clean path through the noise. The first minutes were a storm. Jason locked onto the relay and fired. The relay tried to spin up a shield, but it was built for talk, not war. It burst like glass. The escort behind it wobbled and fled. On the main ship, Rachel ordered a broad jamming sweep to cover a group of Xyranth transports that were trying to lift from a broken port. The Karth cruiser turned to stop the transports, and that shift opened its side to Marcus and his team. "Now," Rachel said, and Marcus went. The boarding team moved through the dark like a quick silver river. They cut a neat hole, stepped through, and held their lines clean. Marcus led from the front. He did not shout. He spoke simple words through the comm. "Left clear, push, hold." The Karth soldiers had not fought humans much. They were used to people who broke and ran when lines faltered. Marcus's team did not run. They held. They advanced. They protected the Xyranth prisoners in the lower decks and moved them to the hole they had cut. When a door jammed, Marcus opened it with a tool that the Council would not have liked. He did not pause to think about The first battle in Xyranth space gave the humans a small victory, but it also showed them the storm that was coming. The Karth Dominion would not leave their prey so easily. Their fleets were large, their numbers heavy, and their leaders proud. Rachel Stone stood on the bridge of the human ship and studied the reports. She saw burned ports, broken shields, and Xeranth people clinging to hope that had almost died before the humans came. She knew their work was just beginning. Marcus Green gathered his boarding teams again. He spoke few words, but his men and women followed him without question. They had seen how he moved through fire, how he did not waste time or steps. He told them they would not rest much, that the Karth would return, that every moment counted. They nodded and began sharpening tools, checking weapons, and running through drills in the cramped training room. To them, this was not glory. It was duty, and they had been shaped by Earth to carry such weight. Amanda Lewis stayed in the med bay. The first wave of Xeranth evacuees filled the beds. Their skin was pale, their frames too thin. Amanda worked with simple tools, stitching wounds, mixing clean water with herbs she had learned to use when supplies ran low. She taught the Xeranth children how to clean bandages, how to care for one another. She spoke softly, so her voice could reach into fear and pull out calm. The Xeranth began to look at her as more than a healer. To them, she was proof that the monsters cared. Jason Carter, restless as always, spent hours in the cockpit of his fighter. He checked systems, adjusted thrusters, and ran simulations again and again. He wanted to be ready for the next wave of Karth fighters. Flying was his life, and he knew the Xeranth needed his skill in the sky. He smiled only once when a small Xeranth boy asked him if he really could fly through fire without burning. Jason knelt, ruffled the boy's hair, and said, "I do not burn. I dance between flames." The boy believed him. Daniel Harris worked at comms, sorting the flood of signals. He sent messages to other human outposts and small fleets. Some answered quickly, eager to join. Others hesitated, afraid of council punishment. Daniel understood their fear, but he also knew that silence was no longer a choice. He repeated the Xeranth's first plea in his messages so no one could forget the sound of a gentle voice asking for mercy. Slowly, ships began to join them. They were not many, but they were enough to matter. Rachel called another meeting. Her crew gathered, tired but sharp. She told them what she had learned. The Karth were bringing a larger fleet with carriers and heavy destroyers. They were not just attacking one world. They planned to crush all Xeranth resistance in a single campaign. If that happened, the Xeranth would vanish from the galaxy, remembered only as a quiet people who once painted their walls with bright colors. Rachel would not let that happen. "We cannot fight them head-on," Rachel said, "but we can break their plan. We can strike where they are blind. We can pull them into fights they do not want. We can make them bleed time." Marcus nodded. "We will need to take their carriers. If we cut their hangars, their fighters die in space." Jason's eyes lit. "Give me the carriers. I will rip their wings before they launch." Amanda frowned. "But the Xeranth cities, we cannot leave them open. If we go after ships, who protects the ground?" Rachel looked at her. "We split. Half the fleet stays in orbit to shield cities. Half hits their carriers. We move fast. We do not wait for orders from the council. We are the orders now." The room was quiet for a moment. Then Daniel said, "The council will hear of this. They will call us reckless." Rachel's voice was steady. "They called us monsters already. Let us be monsters with purpose." The plan set, the crew moved. Jason led the strike team with 2 other pilots. They would dive on the Karth carriers as soon as they dropped from faster travel. Marcus prepared boarding pods with explosives to cut open hangar bays. Amanda gathered med teams from Xeranth volunteers, teaching them simple triage so she would not stand alone. Daniel shaped the comm waves to hide their positions, wrapping signals in static so the Karth would chase ghosts. When the Karth arrived, the sky turned into fire. Their carriers opened first, spilling out squadrons of fighters like a swarm of black insects. Jason's team met them head-on. His voice came calm over the comm. "Mark your pairs. Stay tight. Let them chase. Cut them when they turn." He spun his fighter in loops that made the Karth pilots curse in their tongue. He drew them wide, then turned sharp, leaving wreckage in his wake. His wingmates followed, learning from his rhythm. Marcus's boarding pod slammed into the side of the first carrier. His team cut through metal and stormed into the hangar. The Karth inside roared and fought, but they were not ready for humans who moved like shadows. Marcus carried a charge on his back, heavy but sure. He planted it on the main fuel line and called, "Clear." The blast rolled through the bay, tearing fire into every fighter still on the deck. The carrier shuddered, its wings broken before they ever left. On the ground below, Rachel commanded the main ship's shields to spread over a Xyranth capital. The city had been burning for weeks, smoke rising into a red sky. When the shield dome locked into place, cheers rose from the streets. Rachel heard them faintly through open channels. She felt the sound press into her chest like a reminder. They were not fighting only to kill. They were fighting to protect voices that still dared to cheer. Amanda received the wounded as soon as evac transports landed. She worked with Xyranth volunteers, showing them how to bind wounds, how to calm someone before moving broken bones. The Xyranth learned quickly. They moved with trembling hands at first, but Amanda guided them with patience. Soon, they were helping one another with strength they did not know they had. Amanda knew then that hope was spreading, even faster than fear. The battle raged for hours. Jason took down another carrier's launch bay, his fighter weaving through heavy fire. Marcus lost 3 men in the boarding fight, but saved hundreds of Xyranth prisoners chained in the carrier's lower decks. Amanda saved a girl with crushed lungs by building a simple air pump from spare tubing. Daniel cut off a Karth broadcast meant to spread panic, replacing it with a steady message. "You are not alone. Earth stands with you." The words reached across cities, across broken fields, into hiding places where people wept and then lifted their heads. When the battle finally ended, the Karth had lost 2 carriers and pulled back to regroup. The humans were battered, their ships scarred, but they still held the skies. The Xyranth walked out of shelters and looked up at the stars with new eyes. For the first time, they believed they might survive. Rachel stood on the bridge, silent, watching the last of the Karth ships vanish into faster travel. She felt the weight of the dead, both human and Xyranth. She felt the pull of what still lay ahead. But she also felt the shift in the air. The Xyranth had hope now, and hope was a weapon sharper than steel. She turned to her crew. "We are not finished," she said. "This was one fight. The war still grows. But remember this. When they begged for mercy, no one else answered. We did, and we will again." Her crew nodded. Marcus's face was calm, Amanda's eyes tired but firm, Jason's lips curved in a faint smile, Daniel's hands steady on the console. They were monsters to the galaxy, but to the Xyranth, they were the shield that stood between them and the dark. And so the monsters of Earth prepared for the next storm, knowing it would be worse but ready to face it all the same. The days after the battle felt heavy for everyone. The Xyranth cities stood under broken skies, with smoke rising from the ruins and fires that had not yet died out. Children walked barefoot on stone streets that had cracks from falling ships, and elders tried to repair shelters with whatever tools they could find. Above them, human ships floated like gray shadows guarding the skies. The Karth Dominion had pulled back, but no one believed they were finished. Everyone knew they would return with more strength. On the human ship, Rachel Stone moved from deck to deck, speaking to her crew and to the Xyranth survivors they had rescued. She did not use fancy words. She only said what was true. She told them the fight was not over, but that they had already proved the Karth could bleed. Her calm voice gave people courage even when fear tried to creep back in. She carried herself like a rock in a storm, and her crew leaned on that strength. Marcus Green worked with his boarding teams to recover supplies from wreckage. They moved through half-broken ships, gathering food packs, weapons, and fuel. The Xyranth came with them, watching closely. Marcus showed them how to check doors, how to move carefully in burned corridors, how to stand guard while others worked. He spoke slowly, with few words, but the Xyranth listened. They began to copy his movements, their soft hands learning the grip of a weapon. Marcus never forced them. He only said, "If you want to live, you must be ready to hold your ground." They nodded, their eyes wide, and followed his lead. Amanda Lewis spent her days surrounded by the wounded. The med bay smelled of burned flesh, bitter herbs, and clean water. She barely slept, her hands always moving from one patient to another. Xyranth healers began to join her, shy at first, then stronger as they learned. Amanda gave them tasks, mixing herbs, changing bandages, checking pulses. She smiled at them when they did well, and that smile gave them more strength than any medicine. The Xyranth healers had never worked under such pressure, but Amanda told them gently, "In pain you find your strength. In saving others you save yourself." They carried her words into the crowded shelters, and soon the Xyranth people began healing one another. Jason Carter was restless, as always. When the sky was quiet, he trained. He flew his fighter in sharp loops above the cities, watching every corner of the horizon. He imagined where the Karth would appear, where they would strike, and he practiced cutting them off. Some of the Zyranth children sat on rooftops and watched him. To them he looked like a star dancing across the clouds. They began to cheer when his fighter passed overhead. Jason pretended not to hear, but in his heart he felt their hope growing stronger. Daniel Harris stayed by the comms, his fingers never still. He gathered signals from deep space, listening for the Karth fleets. He also sent messages across the galaxy, telling other human crews what was happening. Some replied quickly, promising to come. Others sent only silence. Still, Daniel kept sending. He believed that silence could be broken if the message was strong enough. He repeated the same words. They begged for mercy. No one answered. We did. Join us. Rachel soon learned that the Karth were not only planning another attack, they were also spreading fear. The Karth used their machines to send false messages, telling the Zyranth that humans would abandon them, that they were only using them as pawns. Rachel gathered her crew to discuss the danger. Marcus wanted to hit the Karth ships directly. Jason wanted to chase their scouts out of the sky. Amanda said the Zyranth needed truth more than battle. Rachel listened to all of them, then made her choice. We will fight the lies with action, she said. If they say we will leave, we will stay. If they say we will use them, we will share what we have. Let our lives prove their lies false. So the humans shared their food with the Zyranth, even when their own supplies ran low. They trained the Zyranth in simple drills, teaching them to protect their homes with courage instead of fear. Amanda walked through broken streets with her medkit, healing openly where all could see. Jason escorted Zyranth transports, his fighter darting in the sky like a shield of fire. Marcus drilled with Zyranth volunteers, turning them into fighters who no longer shook at the sound of gunfire. Slowly, the Zyranth began to believe not in words but in the steady proof of action. One evening, Rachel stood with a Zyranth counselor on the roof of a half-broken hall. The counselor looked at the human ship hanging above and said, "The galaxy calls you monsters. I see people who give us water, food, and hope. Why do they fear you so?" Rachel did not answer at first. She watched the stars, dark and endless. Then she said, "Because we come from a world that tried to kill us every day. We learned to fight storms, beasts, and hunger. We did not break. That is why they fear us. But sometimes the galaxy needs those who do not break." The counselor bowed their head and whispered, "Then let the monsters stay with us." The next day, the Karth returned. Their fleet was larger than before, with heavy destroyers leading the way. The ground shook as their weapons lit up the sky. Jason leapt into his fighter before Rachel even gave the order. "I see them," he said, his voice sharp with focus. "Coming from the east line. I will hold them." Rachel gave him a calm reply. "Do not hold alone. Let them chase you and we will strike from the side." Jason only laughed, then cut through the sky with a speed that made even Marcus shake his head. The humans moved fast. Marcus led his team into another boarding action, this time on a destroyer. They fought through heavy fire, the halls thick with smoke. The Zyranth volunteers came with them, nervous but determined. Marcus guided them with calm words, showing them how to cover doors, how to protect each other. For the first time, Zyranth hands fired weapons alongside human hands. The destroyer shook with battle, and at last they forced it to pull back. Amanda worked without pause in the med bay as waves of wounded poured in. Her voice never rose, never shook. She directed her team with steady hands, showing the Zyranth healers how to keep moving even when their eyes were full of tears. "We cry later," she said softly. "Now we save." And they did, pulling hundreds back from the edge of death. Daniel jammed the Karth signals again, cutting off their lies. Instead, he broadcast the sound of Zyranth voices cheering when the destroyer fell back. He sent that sound across the galaxy so no one could deny it. The Karth could no longer say the Zyranth were broken. The galaxy now heard their voices rising with courage. The battle raged for a full day. Jason's fighter danced through the skies, drawing the Karth away from the city shields. Marcus held the line in the destroyer, pushing his team further than they thought possible. Amanda saved lives until her hands were raw and trembling. Daniel kept the comms clear, guiding ships through the storm. Rachel commanded it all, her voice steady even when the ship shook under fire. When the Karth finally retreated again, the Zyranth stood taller. They were no longer only victims hiding in caves. They had fought beside the monsters of Earth and had survived. In the burned streets, children pointed at the human ships and whispered. They came when no one else did. The Zyranth began to believe that they could win, not just survive. Rachel stood with her crew that night, looking at the scarred horizon. They were tired, bruised, and carrying the weight of the dead, but their eyes held fire. Rachel spoke softly. "This is not the end. The Karth will come again, but so will we. As long as they beg for mercy, we will answer." And so the monsters of Earth became more than a name. They became a promise written in the stars, a promise that would not break no matter how dark the night became. The war stretched on. Days blurred into nights, and the Xeranth world still burned in places where the Karth Dominion had left their mark. The sky was filled with broken ships drifting like bones. Smoke still rose from cities that had not yet healed. But there was a change now. The Xeranth no longer hid in silence. They began to rebuild, to take up tools, and even to stand guard with weapons in hand. And above them the humans stayed, their ships like watchful shadows. The monsters of Earth had not left even when the Karth tried to scare them away with fire and fear. Rachel Stone walked the bridge with quiet steps. Her eyes moved from one screen to another, reading the lines of battle reports. She knew the Karth were angry. She knew they would return in greater force. Already, scouts had seen heavy fleets gathering on the edge of Xeranth space. Rachel understood what it meant. The Karth wanted to finish the fight in one great strike. She also knew that if they lost this next battle, the Xeranth would be erased. There would be no second chance. She called her crew together. Marcus Green stood tall, arms folded, his face steady as stone. Amanda Lewis came with tired eyes, her hands still red from the work of healing. Jason Carter leaned against the wall, restless, already thinking of the sky. Daniel Harris carried his datapad, lines of comm traffic still scrolling across the screen. Rachel looked at each of them and said, "The Karth are gathering. They will come soon with more fire than before. We must hold them. Not only for the Xeranth, but for every world watching. If we fall, the galaxy will believe the Karth cannot be stopped. If we stand, they will believe the monsters of Earth are more than fear, they are hope." No one argued. They knew the truth of her words. Marcus said simply, "Then we prepare." The days that followed were filled with work. Marcus drilled Xeranth volunteers in open fields. Their hands were clumsy, their bodies thin, but they learned quickly. He showed them how to move as one, how to watch each other's backs, how to face fear without running. At first, their steps stumbled, but soon their feet grew steady. Their voices grew louder when they shouted their drills. Marcus watched them with a small nod. He did not smile, but inside he felt pride. Amanda trained Xeranth healers in large tents filled with herbs, cloth, and water. She taught them how to stop bleeding, how to keep someone breathing, how to carry the weak without breaking their bones. She spoke in simple words, repeating them until the Xeranth could say them back. Stop the bleeding, keep them breathing, do not let them die. Her lessons spread from one healer to another, until whole villages knew how to save their own. Amanda did not rest, but she did not complain. Her strength was in giving, and she gave until her body shook with exhaustion. Jason flew constant patrols above the cities. His fighter cut across the clouds, sharp and fast, watching for signs of the enemy. The children still cheered when he passed. Jason pretended not to hear, but he flew a little lower so they could see him better. He also trained Xeranth pilots, teaching them how to fly old transports as if they were warships. You do not need the best ship, he told them. You need courage and speed. Make your enemy chase you, then turn and cut. The Xeranth listened, and slowly their hands grew firm on the controls. Daniel worked at comms without pause. He sent messages into deep space calling for more human crews. He shared stories of the battles they had fought, of Xeranth children saved, of cities standing again. Some humans answered. Small ships, rough freighters turned into war vessels, came to join them. They were not many, but each ship mattered. Daniel also spread messages to the galaxy, making sure the Karth's lies could not stand. He sent images of Xeranth rebuilding, of humans standing guard, of hope shining in broken streets. The council did not speak, but the people of other worlds listened. Whispers began to grow. The monsters of Earth were not devouring, they were protecting. When the Karth came again, they came with everything they had promised. Their fleet was vast, their ships heavy with weapons, their banners dark across the stars. The sky shook when they arrived. Rachel stood on the bridge and watched them appear, her face calm. Here it is, she said. The storm we expected. Hold the line. The battle began with fire. The Karth destroyers opened first, their guns tearing into the shields of the human ships. Jason darted forward with his squadron, weaving through the blasts. His voice came steady over the comm. I will draw their eyes. Cut their wings while I dance. His fighter spun in loops, pulling enemy ships into wild chases. Behind him, human and Xyranth pilots struck, their shots clean and sharp. Marcus led his team into another boarding action, this time against a heavy cruiser. The fight inside was brutal. The Karth soldiers were strong, their armor thick, but Marcus moved with calm strength. He guided his team room by room, clearing corridors, freeing Xyranth prisoners locked in cages. The volunteers who came with him fought hard, their fear turning into fire. For the first time, the Xyranth fought not as victims but as warriors beside the humans. Amanda worked in a tent near the city walls, her hands never still. Wounded came in waves carried by Xyranth and humans alike. Amanda gave orders without raising her voice. She worked with the calm of someone who could not afford panic. She pulled people back from death with simple tools and endless will. When a young Xyranth healer broke down in tears, Amanda lifted her chin and said, "Do not stop. If you stop, they die. Cry later." The healer wiped her face and kept working. Amanda moved on to the next patient. Daniel fought a different battle. He jammed Karth signals, blocking their lies, and sent out the truth instead. He broadcast the sight of Xyranth standing with humans, the sound of their voices shouting in defiance. Across the galaxy, others watched. They saw that the monsters of Earth were not fleeing. They were standing, holding the line, fighting for a people not their own. Rachel commanded the fleet with steady hands. She shifted ships to cover weak spots, sent reinforcements where Jason called for help, and gave Marcus the clear paths he needed. Her voice never rose, never faltered. Even when their shields burned, even when alarms filled the bridge, Rachel's calm spread to everyone. They believed in her, and so they held. The battle raged for hours. The sky filled with fire, and the ground shook with blasts. Jason's fighter was hit, smoke trailing from one wing, but he refused to fall. He twisted the ship into a sharp climb and shouted, "I am still here." His squadron roared back in answer. Marcus fought until his armor was cracked, his body bleeding, but he did not stop. Amanda's hand shook with exhaustion, but she still moved, still healed. Daniel's voice grew hoarse as he shouted into comms, guiding ships through the storm. Rachel stood at the center, her eyes burning, her will unbroken. At last, the Karth began to falter. They had expected easy prey, but they found only fire. Their destroyers pulled back, their cruisers turned, their banners faded into the dark. The Xyranth streets filled with cheers that shook the air. For the first time, the Karth had been forced to retreat not once, but twice. The monsters of Earth had not only survived, they had won. When the sky grew quiet, Rachel stood on the bridge, her crew around her. She looked at each of them. Marcus with blood on his armor, Amanda with tired eyes, Jason with a grin through the smoke on his face, Daniel with his hands still tapping comms. She nodded once and said, "We are not finished. They will come again. But we have shown them this. Mercy may beg, but monsters answer. And when monsters stand, even empires can fall." Her crew did not cheer. They only nodded, their faces firm. They knew more battles were coming. They knew the cost would be high, but they also knew they would not stop. The monsters of Earth had found their place, and it was not in silence. It was in standing where no one else dared, and so the humans prepared again, their ships scarred but strong, their hearts heavy but burning. The Xyranth looked at them with new eyes, no longer afraid but filled with respect and gratitude. The galaxy still whispered the word monsters, but now it carried a new meaning. It meant guardians. It meant shields. It meant hope that would not break. The smoke of battle cleared slowly. Broken ships drifted in the sky, some still burning, some silent forever. On the ground, Xyranth cities were cracked but still standing. For the first time in weeks, the air was filled not only with the cries of the wounded, but with the sound of people cheering. The humans had not left. They had fought until the Karth Dominion turned and fled. The monsters of Earth had stood their ground, and the Xyranth had lived another day. Rachel Stone stood on the bridge, her eyes on the stars where the enemy had vanished. She felt the weight of what they had done. They had pushed the Karth back, but she knew it was not the end. The Karth would return. Empires did not forget wounds to their pride. Rachel's crew stood with her, each of them carrying their own scars. Marcus Green leaned against a rail, his armor cracked and marked with blood. Amanda Lewis sat quietly, her hands bandaged after days of healing. Jason Carter cleaned the soot from his face, his fighter still smoking from the last run. Daniel Harris kept scanning the comms, making sure the silence of retreat was real. They were tired, but none of them were broken. Rachel spoke in a calm voice that carried across the bridge. This is not the end, but today we showed them something they will not forget. The Zyrinth are still alive. We are still here, and if they beg again, we will answer again. Her crew nodded. They did not cheer. They did not need to. Their silence was steady, stronger than any shout. The Zyrinth people began to rebuild. They painted their walls with bright colors again, colors that had almost vanished under the ash of war. They planted food in the soil, even though the ground was scarred. Children played in the streets, their laughter soft but growing stronger each day, and they looked up at the sky with new eyes. They no longer saw only fear. They saw human ships dark against the stars, watching and protecting. The word monster still passed through their lips, but now it was spoken with respect, even gratitude. Marcus spent his days training more Zyrinth fighters. He stood in fields and drilled them until their hands no longer shook when they held weapons. He showed them how to fight as one, how to protect each other, how to move even when fear tried to freeze their steps. The Zyrinth learned, slowly but surely. Their backs straightened, their voices grew louder, and their eyes no longer held only fear. Marcus rarely spoke more than a few words, but those words stayed with them. Hold the line. Do not break. Together. Amanda's medbay stayed full, but it was different now. The wounded came with hope in their eyes. Zyrinth healers worked beside her, no longer timid but strong, their hands steady as they treated burns and set broken bones. Amanda taught them more, passing her knowledge as if it were water flowing from her to them. She knew she could not heal everyone, but she could give the Zyrinth the power to heal themselves. And when a child she had once saved brought her a flower in thanks, Amanda smiled for the first time in weeks. Jason kept flying. His fighter was patched with new plates, some taken from wreckage, but it still moved like a blade in the sky. He flew low over the cities, making sure the people saw him, making sure the Karth scouts stayed far away. The children still pointed and cheered, and Jason finally waved back one day. He also trained Zyrinth pilots in old transports, turning them into a defense force that could protect their own skies. You do not need to fly like me, he told them. You need to fly like yourselves. Quick, clever, ready. They believed him, and their courage grew. Daniel never stopped sending messages. He spread the truth of what had happened. The humans had come when no one else did. He sent images of Zyrinth rebuilding, of humans and Zyrinth fighting side by side, of children laughing under the shield of human ships. Slowly, messages began to return. Small fleets from other human outposts promised to join. Even whispers from alien worlds began to rise. They were not official council orders, but private captains, traders, and soldiers who wanted to stand where no one else had dared. Daniel read each message, his hope growing with every word. Rachel carried the weight of command, but she also carried the trust of both her crew and the Zyrinth people. She met often with the Zyrinth Council, sitting with them not as a conqueror but as an ally. She listened to their needs: food, medicine, training, protection. She gave what she could, and when she could not, she promised to find a way. She did not lie to them. She told them the Karth would come again, and it would be harder next time. But she also told them they would not be alone. The council believed her because her actions had already proved her words true. The galaxy began to whisper louder. The council, silent before, now watched with unease. Some feared the humans even more, saying the monsters had shown their true nature. Others began to wonder if the monsters were exactly what the galaxy needed. In markets and ports, in quiet taverns and noisy docks, stories spread. They told of Zyrinth cities burning, of pleas ignored, and of Earth answering with fire and steel. The monsters had come and they had saved the helpless. That story could not be stopped. One night, Rachel stood outside the city with Marcus, Amanda, Jason, and Daniel. The stars were clear, the air heavy with the smell of ash and new growth. They said little. They were too tired for long words. But they shared a silence that was strong, a silence that said they had done something no one else would. Finally, Amanda spoke softly. Do you think they will ever see us as more than monsters? Rachel looked at the stars. Maybe, maybe not. But it does not matter. What matters is what we do. If being monsters means protecting those who have no one else, then I will wear the name. Marcus nodded. Jason smiled faintly. Daniel looked down at his screen where another message of thanks from a far-off ship had just arrived. They stood together, the weight of war heavy on their shoulders, but also the fire of purpose burning in their hearts. When the next dawn came, the Xyranth children painted a mural on a broken wall. It showed human ships above their city, shields spread wide. It showed humans standing beside Xyranth, weapons ready, hands joined. And at the bottom, written in their soft script, were the words, "The monsters came and we lived. The war was not over. The Karth would return." But now the Xyranth were not alone. The humans had answered once and they would again. Across the stars the legend began to spread. When mercy begged and the galaxy turned away, the monsters of Earth answered. And in their answer, hope was born. Rachel looked at her crew, at the Xyranth people, and at the rising sun. She felt tired, but she also felt alive. She knew the battles ahead would be hard, but she knew they would stand. The monsters of Earth had become more than a name. They had become a promise that no one would be left to beg in silence again, and that promise, carried on human hearts, would burn brighter than any star.